In 1990, Capcom released a cute action platformer that definitely reminds me of the Monster World series. Let's check the port by Sega of Chiki Chiki Boys. Chiki Chiki Boys, or Mega Twins as was known in the West, was developed and released by Capcom for their CP system hardware in 1990, and it wasn't long before the first versions made it to homes via the Amiga and Atari ST. But I'll be focusing on the Sega version that was the first version to be mostly faithful to the arcade original. The port was developed in-house by Sega with sound design being handled by Visco, who would hit Japan in late 1992 and then the rest of the world in 1993. It is a side-scrolling platformer with swords, magic, an interesting mix of enemies and characters, and a heavy dose of cuteness. You'll travel to 4 different areas and 9 different levels, finding your way to the end of each to battle the boss and gain an item. Pretty standard stuff really. Maybe a bit novel for an arcade game, but certainly not for a console game. Chiki Chiki Boys follows twin sons of the king of a land called Aluria that gets attacked after hundreds of years of peace. The land is completely destroyed and the population decimated. So those twins set out to restore their land by searching for a stone called the Dragon Blue Eyes. No, not that other thing. Each twin, they don't have a name until you give them one, plays slightly different. They are kind of like difficulty levels in the Sega version, since the biggest and really only difference between this version and the arcade is the lack of 2 players. So you have the option of the blue twin who has a better physical attack but limited magic, or the red twin who has more magic but a weaker attack. I would say that makes the red twin hard mode, as the magic is useful but you can always pick up more. So your physical attack being as strong as possible is way more useful. Mechanically, the game is an action platformer. You have a sword you swing while you hop and bop around the screen, and you can occasionally throw out magic. Surprisingly, there is a wall jump mechanic which is definitely unique in a game like this, allowing you to reach items and collectibles in a more complex and explorative way. The sword attack isn't very complicated. It just slashes in a little arc, but thankfully it seems to connect well, and that's really all you need in a game like this. The magic, signified by the oysters and pearls in the top right, which is certainly an odd way to signify magic, is also just as simplistic in its approach. Just click a button and an attack fills the screen. It reminds me a bit of the magic in Golden Axe in that way. Interestingly though, you get a new magical attack after beating each boss, but it only lasts until you get a game over, and then you're back to the regular base attack. That's kind of okay though. While I've found all the attacks useful, really like the beach ball style bombs, the base attack was fine almost the entire time. It covers a lot of the screen with a lot of damage, and since magic is limited like it is, I never used it for much more than that first big attack against the boss or as a way to recover from a hairy moment. You can also power the twins up between each level. As you play, you have lots of opportunities to collect coins, up in high corners, trapped in chests, and enemies drop them, but before you start the next level, you can use those coins to power up your sword and shield for better attack and defense. Collecting coins becomes crucial as you go along, since each level is more expensive as the last, and they aren't the only thing your coins can go to. If you're struggling, you may need to purchase health, a magic refill, or even another continue. I love this. So few games like this at the time use their random collectibles in any meaningful way. It is usually for points or extra lives, and this adds to the strategy. It's a very interesting mix of mechanics when you think of not only the time it was released and that it was originally an arcade title. It's not super rare or anything, but it feels like this should have been on a home console to start rather than an arcade cabinet. I mentioned at the start that Chiki Chiki Boys reminds me of the Monster World series, and I find the parallels between the 2 games and even the Adventure Island games that release a few years from now to be one of the more interesting aspects of Chiki Chiki Boys. Of course, I don't really mean the original Wonder Boy, but as the series moved on to the last 2 arcade titles, Wonder Boy and Monsterland in 1987, and then Wonder Boy 3 Monster Lair in 1988, there's some obvious similarities in overall style, concepts, and some gameplay. By the time you get to Wonder Boy 3 The Dragon's Trap in 1989 and Wonder Boy in Monster World in 1991, Wonder Boy had taken a hard detour into action RPG or action adventure, whatever you want to call it. But the attack mechanics, the feeling of the platforming, and just the general aesthetic really feel like they're cut from the same cloth. I of course can't confirm it was the intention from Capcom to make their answer to the Wonder Boy games, but it certainly seems like there were some eyes across the aisles to what Westone was up to. I also don't think it was coincidence that Sega picked it up to be an in-house port, just like they had with the entire Wonder Boy series up to then. I'm not saying Capcom was trying to rip off Wonder Boy, that isn't the only influence here, but it's hard to ignore that initial gut reaction that this could fall into the same series and no one would even notice. Despite the overall simplified arcade-style gameplay, the level design keeps things mixed up, so at no point did I feel like things were just going through the motions. There's a good amount of verticality in the levels for the style of game it is, and it has a quick pace unless you stand around trying to farm coins. Most of the levels are over really quickly in fact, but the challenge and density of the enemies keeps you from blowing through an already condensed and quick experience. You start initially with the 3 levels you need to complete before moving on to the next section, and they follow a very similar path of grassy area, cave, lava, sky area, and the sky section actually changes up the mechanics a bit and has you flying about with adorable little wings on your hat. This floaty bit of platforming basically gets recycled for any underwater levels as well. You just replace the wings with a little snorkel. I enjoy that they didn't really animate any water effects, you just know you're in water because of the goggles and fish. After that, they split the levels kind of oddly. There are technically the first 3 and then the last stretch of the game in the 4th section, but that gets split up into several smaller levels. They kind of mirror those initial 3 levels, grassy area, water, cave, sky, until you get to the final stretch in the more castle area for that final run. Enemies, bosses, and other characters feel so random, as if they all come from other games or franchises. I'm not seeing much of a connection in them. You have these little fuzzy balls that kind of remind me of the original Popples, which by the way never stop spawning. But you also have lima beans, tiny vampire kids, and sentient mini volcanoes. I have no idea what's happening in this game. All of them are fairly aggressive for their cuteness factor, and they will fill a screen and swarm you quickly. Thankfully, none of them are tanks, especially if you use the blue twin and upgrade your sword at least once. Boss fights take place on single screens and are very tight spaced, especially with some of the larger bosses. You'll face a few of them more than once as well, like the 2-headed mechanical dragon tortoise thing. I think my favorite boss though is the vampire bat guy with a tall pointy fedora that is wearing just underwear. Yes, you heard that exactly correct. He basically flashes you constantly by opening his wings while he hangs from the ceiling and has other bats chase you around. It's absolutely ridiculous. Most of these boss fights aren't very strategy heavy though. They have some moves and patterns to memorize, but mostly you'll just be swinging away and using your magic to clear out any more hectic moments. This is not a complaint. Honestly, I'm glad the boss fights aren't on a whole other level when most of this game is a fun arcade romp. They aren't laughably easy or anything, but you don't suddenly feel like you're missing mechanics to fight a boss. Simply find the spot you can hit them and try to avoid their attacks. Chiki Chiki Boys hits all the right chords for me. A cute arcade platformer with that difficulty that at first seems a bit rough, but quickly becomes comfy and enjoyable. Playing Chiki Chiki Boys is like junk food. It isn't deep or complex, but I have a hard time putting it down. Graphically, the presentation is nice, big sprites, detailed designs for the time, and things are colorful and bright. Like I said, they didn't bother much with the effects like having any very noticeable, oh, this is underwater, or any background effects like parallax scrolling or anything like that. At least the fire area has those squiggles so we know it's hot. But some of it I miss for sure. The background a lot of time is very flat and boring, despite the super happy sun in the sky. It seems like they focus mostly on indoor areas towards the end with some nicer architecture. But the game runs very well. I can't think of any major slowdown or big moments when the game felt clunky. I've said it recently, but this is probably the most important part of games like this anyway, especially with a hectic arcade-style gameplay when you can have moments where each hit matters. Sure, it'd be nice if there was some more personality and eye candy. We've been spoiled by people pushing the hardware for years. But this was released originally in 1990, and not even Sonic had hit the Mega Drive yet. Music is fantastic. I love the soundtrack. It's punchy, energetic. You feel like you're on the best adventure you could ever be on. If this game isn't for you, this soundtrack is still a hidden gem on its own. Lots of really good percussion tracks driven by some really nice melodies and instrumentation choices. There's a little bit of that tinny sound in some of it, unfortunately, but I would put this on and just listen to it. It's got some really catchy moments. Chiki Chiki Boys is a game that checks all the boxes for me when it comes to these kind of platformers. From the cute, almost early Dragon Ball anime aesthetics to the fun arcade platforming, catchy music, and a difficulty curve that never feels cheap. It isn't perfect, but it isn't far off. I can't really think of any major complaints against Chiki Chiki Boys when looking at it in context. Sure, it would be nice if it was a bit longer. Once I learned the game and figured out how to balance my coin usage to stay powered up, I got through a round of the game fairly quickly. If you manage to not game over entirely, you're looking at around an hour from start to finish. It would also be nice to have more options for continues. You have your first few lives, a continue, and the option to buy probably one more unless you really want to hang around and try to farm coins. It is also a bummer that they cut the 2-player mode. I don't really understand why they did this unless 2 players cause too much slowdown. But that added feature would add another bonus to this game and a lot more replayability in general. If you want that mode back on a console, you can check out the Turbo CD version. But other than those 2 complaints, and maybe not being the deepest of games, making it more of a when the mood strikes kind of game, I can't think of any real faults with it. If you're like me and enjoy this aesthetic with your retro games, or if you're always looking for something in that Wonder Boy category, you should give Chiki Chiki Boys a shot. It isn't the cheapest game on the Sega Genesis, especially for the kind of niche position it falls in, but a loose card is around $30, and that's not bad for this. But that's all I have for this episode of Retroactive. What are your thoughts on the Chiki Chiki Boys? Let me know in the comments below, and I'll see you next time. Hey, this is Kevin. Once again, thanking you so much for watching another episode of Retroactive. If you liked it, please hit that like button, subscribe, leave a comment, all the stuff I'm supposed to say. And I also want to remind you that I do have a Ko-fi account and a Discord. Links will be in the description. Bye.